Good evening, everyone. To introduce myself, I am Dr. Madhu MP. I am a consultant medical gastroenterologist at Aster Harvey Hospital in JP Nagar, Bangalore. So today we are here to talk to you about hepatitis. There are a lot of myths, a lot of misconception, and a lot of fear, especially among the younger public with respect to this hepatitis. So we'll try to clear some of your doubts, and we'll be focusing on more on viral hepatitis today. So to discuss further, we have Dr. Colleague with me.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Arvind, consultant HPB surgery and abdominal transplant at Aster Group of Hospitals, Bangalore. So let us begin with a few common questions that everybody has with respect to hepatitis. So, Dr. Madhu, first of all, what is hepatitis?
So basically, the hepatitis, to simplify things, hepa means liver. So itis means it's an inflammation of the liver. So in simple words, we can call this as liver infection or a liver inflammation. So in the general terms, roughly we can call it as like jaundice. May not be true, but at least we can call this as probably as jaundice.
So what would be the common causes for this hepatitis?
So the common ones that we come across on our day-to-day practice is usually viral hepatitis. In viral hepatitis, we have 5 types of viruses like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, D, and hepatitis E virus. Other than this, there are other causes also. One of the other common seen things which we see is alcohol, especially when you take alcohol for a duration of about 5 to 10 years in excessive amount. Some of these individuals can develop liver damage leading to alcoholic hepatitis. In similar way to alcohol, there is this pandemic of obesity and fatty liver. So fatty liver, when it's deposited in excessive amount, can lead to inflammation in the liver. We call it as non-alcoholic hepatosteatitis. And there is other causes also. The common other causes are drugs like tablets, what we take. So the common ones are antibiotics commonly used like amoxicillin acid can cause this. Some of other drugs which are day to day used are anti-tubercular drugs, or anti-epileptic drugs, like the drugs which are used for fits. These can cause this, or chemical like anti-neoplastic like cancer drugs can cause this. So over there we have some herbal medications, over-the-counter drugs. These are all some of the common causes where we come across as the reasons for hepatitis.
So today I think we shall limit ourselves to the viral hepatitis part. So what are the modes of transmission for this viral hepatitis, Dr. Madhu?
Yeah, with respect to viral hepatitis, so hepatitis A and E are the ones which usually we come across through fecal-oral route of transmission. That is basically they spreads through contaminated food, contaminated water, or whenever there is a hygiene is a problem, especially overcrowding, especially you can see in hostels, or whenever there is a mass gathering, especially it spreads through fecal-oral route. So hygiene is a concern whenever there is hepatitis A and E spreads through this. And with respect to hepatitis B, C, and D, usually they spreads through blood and blood products. Like around 1980s, 90s, when bloods were not screened for a transfusion. So if an infected person's blood is given to a normal healthy individual, you would acquire hepatitis B and C. But of late, since it is a mandatory to screen every blood product before transfusion, so it is lesser chances of late to get transfusion related hepatitis B and C. Other modes of transmission which is very common in India is mother to child transmission. It is very important because if the child gets that hepatitis at an early age, they are prone to develop long-term problems. So this is one of the most common mode of transmission in Indian subcontinents. Other mode of transmission is sexual transmission. If one of the spouse is infected, they can infect the other spouse also. It can spread through IV drug abuse, or it can spread through this tattooing, which is common in especially the younger population. So it can also, if the needle is not sterilized, so that can also one of the reasons where they can get it.
So what are the symptoms? How will they present to you, doctor?
Okay, so to summarize, to simplify things, so we'll be focusing on hepatitis A and E, so as a club together. So I already told these usually spreads through fecal-oral route of transmission. So once somebody gets this infection, within a week or so they present with prodromal symptoms, like they'll present with low-grade fever, they'll have lassitude, they'll feel weakness, then they'll have generalized fatigue. So they can present with nausea, vomiting, mild abdominal discomfort. These are all the things they will have initially. Later they may progress to develop jaundice. So when they develop yellow coloration of their eyes, yellow urine, So these are all the things. And hepatitis A and E are usually self-limited illness. So about 90 to 95% of the people will recover. The recovery may take few weeks to months. Probably by 2 months, about 70% of the people will recover. Some may even require a little more longer duration. Only in about few people, probably in about 2 to 3% of this hepatitis A and E can develop severe infections. We call them as acute liver failure. So if that happens, it can be catastrophic also. Whereas with respect to hepatitis B, C and D, so we'll not talk much about hepatitis B because it is not very common. So basically it happens with hepatitis B infection. So we'll focus on hepatitis B and C, where these usually the people, what we need to important, why is important B and C is, with respect to hepatitis, there can be two forms of infections. So they can present with acute hepatitis or they can present with chronic hepatitis. What is acute hepatitis? It is an infection which happens for the first time and it is a self-limited illness and most of them will recover. Whereas in chronic hepatitis, the virus stays in the body for more than 6 months. So this chronicity happens only with hepatitis B and C infection, which is not the case with hepatitis A and E. So if they develop, if you take people with hepatitis B and C, only about 30% will have a symptomatic illness in the past or in the present. So another 60 to 70% may not have any symptoms. So basically somebody might have been infected in your family. So you get a testing done for some blood transfusion, or you, because there is a family member who has been tested positive, you get it done. So about 70% of these people will not have any symptoms. So people should get tested. So if they are found positive, then we can further investigate and find out. So Dr. Arvind, since being a surgeon, what are the surgical causes? What are the causes you see from your perspective as reasons for jaundice?
So, the causes for surgical jaundice, we can divide it into benign and malignant causes. The commonest that we see in benign causes is a gallstone disease with stones in the common bile duct, meaning the stones have passed from the gallbladder into the bile duct and are blocking the flow of bile. So this is one of the commonest that we see. Apart from this, it could be because of an inflammatory stricture. Say, suppose somebody develops pancreatitis and as a part of it and develops a biliary stricture later in the course of the disease. Or it could be malignant. Say there is a stricture at the hilum of confluence of the bile duct, or a mid-biliary stricture, or there is a carcinoma in the head of pancreas or periampullary region. In these cases, the jaundice is more profound than biliary causes, and depending on the degree of obstruction, the jaundice level might be from less to quite high.
So when you see this patient, how different are they from medical jaundice? What are the symptoms you see in them usually?
Suppose somebody presents with an acute obstruction, say a gallstone obstructing the bile duct, the patient presents with severe pain, which we term as biliary colic. It lasts for a few hours to almost a day, and patient will have a wrenching sort of a pain in the upper abdomen. They can also present with infection because obstruction to the bile flow can give rise to infection in the biliary system. This we call cholangitis. So they can present with severe pain, fever. In malignant cases, patient apart from these, they will have some constitutional symptoms. Say they might have loss of appetite, there will be significant loss of weight, and carcinoma head of pancreas can present with pain abdomen, and periampullary lesion can present as painless, but the jaundice will be progressive.
So what is important here is, so there are multiple reasons why somebody can develop jaundice. So we, as Dr. Arvind also highlighted, so don't self-diagnose or self-treat yourself. Whenever there is a jaundice, please visit a nearby doctor. Find out the reason why you have developed jaundice, so that your individual treatment can be individualized.
So, like Dr. Madhu said, please keep that in mind whenever you have any of liver-related symptoms, say jaundice. Please visit the doctor, take a consultation so that they can sort out what sort of jaundice you are having, medical or surgical, and treat you accordingly. So, coming to the management part, how do you think we should manage patients who have hepatitis A and E because you've clubbed them together?
Most of them are self-limited illness. These are like treating any viral illness. So basically, there is no specific treatment as such for hepatitis A and E. So most of them are treated as symptomatic and supportive treatment. So most patients can be treated at home. So we usually tell them to take high carbohydrate diet, and there is no dietary restriction as such. And some of these individuals can have vomiting and nausea towards the end of the day, towards evening. So we usually tell them to take the nutrients more towards in the morning hours. And we usually advise them physical rest. They need not be at a bed rest. At least they should be restricting their activities to the household. And few of these individuals, like some of them, about 10 to 20% of the people may have persistent vomiting. They are not able to eat. They may have bleeding tendencies, or they may have little bit of change in their behaviors, conscious level. In such individuals, they may require hospitalization, where again, once they get admitted, they are usually treated symptomatically and supportively with vomiting antiemetic drugs, or they are given good amount of IV fluids, and they are also maintained with nutrition. With this, most of the people, as I told you, about 95% of the individuals should recover. Only in about 2 to 3%, some of them can go on to develop acute liver failure. So the main thing that develop in acute liver failure is they will have altered their behavior. So they may get irritable, excessive sleepiness, finally they may go into coma, and they'll have bleeding tendencies also. So if these two are there, so we should be extremely careful, and you need to visit a doctor as early as possible.
So just to add to that, like only very small percentage, 1 to 2% of them develop acute liver failure. If that is the scenario, then it is best to provide care for that patient in a tertiary center which has the capability of doing a liver transplant on an urgent basis. So very small percentage will require this sort of a treatment, but if somebody develops severe disease, it is better to provide care for them in a transplant unit. So Dr. Madhu, how do we manage the other hepatitis infections like B and C?
Okay, more than hepatitis A and E, this is hepatitis B and C which are concern for us, because these are the two infections which can cause chronicity, means they can stay in the body for more than 6 months, and in the future they can cause you certain issues. So with respect to hepatitis B, what I would like to tell you, it is a dynamic virus. So it is not like something which is very stable, keeps on fluctuating, and not all individuals with hepatitis B requires treatment. Whenever somebody comes to us, especially they found that they have been found hepatitis B, they have gone to donate blood to one of their relatives, or they have gone and undergone a master health checkup. So first thing we'll do is few certain tests are required. Identify whether they have an active infection or they have an infection which is not active, means body has kept the virus in a dormant phase. So then we'll find out. And if that is the case, if they have an active infection, how do we know that? The DNA test, there is a blood test which will tell you how much is the virus in your body. If it is high, we usually start them on oral medications. Very good, very effective drugs are available. Usually once we start them, we'll have to continue for a longer period of time. If somebody do not have an active infection, so in such individual we call them as inactive infection or inactive carriers. In such individuals, we usually call them every 3 to 4 months. We don't usually start medication in them, and they are due to be followed up. So that is the case. So if you take overall, about 60% of the individuals with hepatitis B may not require treatment. So why? Because even if you start medication in hepatitis B, you can only control the disease rather than completely cure it. So hepatitis B, not all will require treatment. Some may just only needs a follow-up. That is what is important with respect to hepatitis B. In comparison to hepatitis B, hepatitis C is a disease everybody should be treated. Similar to hepatitis B, we do certain tests called RNA tests. Again, the test will tell you how much virus is in your body, and if it is high enough, all of them to be treated. Like when we were doing our probably MD or PG degree, treating hepatitis C was a nightmare, because there were a lot of issues related to that. Because initially we used to treat them as interferon injections, which used to cause a lot of side effects. Cost was an issue, and a lot of frequent monitoring was required. And some people used to be discontinued because of the issues related to the drugs. In the last 5-6 years, there is an excellent research with fabulous drugs available now. So it is very easy to treat hepatitis C now, and medicines are usually given as oral tablets. The duration is usually 3 months. Few individuals may require even extension up to 6 months. and up to 95% of the people can be cured with hepatitis C. So all patients with hepatitis should be treated, and they can be completely cured in comparison to hepatitis B infections.
So it is not an exaggeration that if we stress that follow-up is very important, and of late, like Dr. Madhu said, there are very good and very effective drugs with very acceptable side effects which can keep this virus under control or even treat them. So, Dr. Madhu, what are the precautions that one needs to take, especially the family members, and how to take care of themselves from getting the disease?
Yeah, that is important. A lot of concern. Say for example, somebody is positive in your household. So what needs to be done is, for hepatitis B, there is an effective vaccine available. So what somebody has to do is, whoever stays in that household or whoever their relatives, everybody should get the hepatitis B tested. The first thing, if they are proved to be negative, so this vaccine has to be taken, very simple injection, 3 doses has to be taken over a period of 6 months. So with that they will be protected, so that the cross infection can be avoided. That is one thing. With respect to hepatitis C, as of now there is no vaccination available, so nothing much can be done with respect to hepatitis C, but still they can get tested. If they are positive, then further treatment can be done. And there are few things they are worried, like touching, kissing, hugging, can it cause? Usually not. So certain things which can cause hepatitis is sharing a razor, like somebody uses it and anybody else uses the same one, you need to avoid. Toothbrushes should not be shared, and very rarely these earrings worn by these females can be a source of infection. So those are the few certain things which you can avoid, and ideally everybody should get tested. Please get vaccinated so that you can avoid future complications.
So initially you told us that in India the transmission from mother to child is a very important thing. So how do we make sure that that thing is either curbed or controlled?
Yeah, that is very important, because out of hepatitis B and C, India is a major problem in India is hepatitis B infection, not C. So because and one of the modes of transmission is mother to child. Why it is important? Why it is important to prevent mother to child is, if somebody acquires hepatitis B infection below the age of 2 years, means somebody is below 2 years, if you contract an hepatitis B infection, the chronicity rate is almost 90% to 95%. So that is such a high rate. If somebody at 20 years or 30 years gets hepatitis B infection, in such case the chronicity is only about 5%. So you can see the difference of 5% versus 95%. So preventing this child to mother to child transmission is extremely important. So what are the things need to be done is, when somebody gets pregnant or turned positive, so you need to screen all the viral markers. So it is generally done. So at least when they tested positive, so we need to follow them during the pregnancy. And during this last trimester, we usually do this DNA test. If the DNA is high, we usually start medications. So because even the medicine when you start, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to act, so that you prevent transmission from the mother to child. And once the child is born, within 12 hours, the baby should receive the hepatitis B vaccination. At the same time, baby should also be given immunoglobulins. And ideally, it should be given as early as possible, preferably within 12 hours. This is the thing we need to look into. Like last week, I saw a lady who was 37 weeks, hepatitis B positive, very high DNA, but she has never consulted any doctor. Now, treating her is very tricky now, because even if we start medicine, we may not be able to prevent the transmission. So such things can be avoided provided you are aware of the disease, so that you meet a doctor in pre-hand, so that you can prevent the problem to your kid.
So nowadays, for antenatal checkup, screening for hepatitis and hepatitis B, C, HIV is common practice. I mean, it's a sure thing. So the important message here would be that they should follow up with their doctor, get themselves screened, and if detected, seek a expert consultation as soon as they can.
Okay. The same lady which I was discussing, she was known that she had hepatitis B, and in between, they lost to follow up. So they thought that it might have been cured. So probably that negligence would have been an issue.
And there is social stigma also attached with it. I think people should not consider it as a stigma, because nowadays this hepatitis virus is very treatable.
Yeah, that is the message.
So if there is a transmission from mother to a child, they acquire this virus infection at a very early age and they have a long life ahead of them. So, what would be the long term complications?
That's what usually when somebody acquires infection, so the virus becomes active once somebody crosses 30 to 40 years. So later on they can develop what is known as cirrhosis of liver. What is cirrhosis? Normally liver is the biggest organ in the body, measures about 1 to 1.5 kgs, and it does hundreds of functions. When somebody develops cirrhosis of liver, the liver becomes small in size, which it will not be able to perform its function to the fullest capacity. So in such case, when it is not able to perform, certain complications will develop. The first and foremost we see is they develop water in the abdomen. We call it as ascites. They can develop swelling in the legs. So in some of the individuals you might have seen prominent veins behind their leg. We call that varicose vein. Same type they can develop in their foot pipe. So whenever the pressures are high, sometimes they rupture, leading to blood vomiting. They can develop black colored stools, and they may develop progressive jaundice. So these are all the signs of liver failure. So along with that, they can, because the liver is like a battery, it tries to clear all the toxins from the body. So when the toxins are not cleared, some of them go to brain, and they can develop what is known as encephalopathy, hepatic encephalopathy, and some individuals can develop renal dysfunction because of the liver problem also. And finally, some percentage of the cirrhosis people can end up in hepatocellular carcinoma, that is liver cancer. Why cirrhosis is important is because if somebody develops cirrhosis, the average lifespan of an individual is only 2 to 3 years. So we will be treating only the complication of the cirrhosis. So the cirrhosis is basically an irreversible condition. Sometimes the things may not improve. So in order to prevent all these problems, ideally they should get tested, frequently follow up with the doctor so that all these problems can be prevented in near future. So Dr. Arvind, being a transplant surgeon, when do you consider somebody for a liver transplantation? One, and if somebody has cirrhosis leading to a liver cancer, how do you manage such patients?
So to answer your first question, we suggest a transplant for a patient who has cirrhosis when his life expectancy at 1 year is less than 90%, meaning the risk of dying in the next 1 year, if it is greater than 10%, we suggest a transplant. So how does one say that the risk is greater than 10%? There are certain scores like the MEND score which will predict survival over a period of next 3 months. And if the benefit of a transplant is more than 90%, meaning if the success rate of a transplant is more than 90%, when you compare the two, the chance of survival being more than 90% with a transplant and chance of survival being less than 90% without a transplant, it is common sense that we choose the one that has a better outcome. So if anybody who has a risk to life of greater than 10% in the next 1 year, we suggest a transplant. Because nowadays the outcomes with a transplant have been quite good. The 1 year survival is around 90 to 95% and 5 year survival is around 80 to 85%. So that is one. And when somebody develops complications like hepatorenal syndrome, which Dr. Madhu mentioned, saying somebody developing renal dysfunction because of a liver disease, or somebody who has encephalopathy, or somebody who develops infection in the fluid in the abdomen. So these patients are at higher risk of dying. The median survival of these patients is around 6 months to 1 year, meaning 50% of them will not cross beyond 1 year. So these are the patients ideally suited for a transplant so that they can increase the chances of survival and have a better quality of life. So, and to answer your second question, somebody who develops a cancer and also has a liver disease, these are two aspects. One, the patient has a liver disease. Second, he developed a cancer in a diseased liver. So if the liver function is good, then we can offer surgical resection. But if the liver function is bad, determined by a child score or a MEND score, then what we suggest is that the person needs a liver transplant. This will take care of both the diseased liver and the tumor. I am suggesting a transplant in these patients because the diseased liver will not be able to withstand the stress of a surgical resection. Only those patients we advise them to undergo a transplant. Apart from transplant, there are other ways of managing the liver tumor. there can be liver-directed therapies, say radiofrequency ablation or transarterial chemoembolization, transarterial radioembolization, which can also tackle this tumor, especially in patients who also have liver disease along with the tumor. But the preference would be to do a transplant or do a surgical resection if they are fit, and otherwise do a liver directed therapy. And they say that radiofrequency ablation can give a good result comparable to surgery if they are small, say 2 or 3 centimeters. But if they are big, then it might not be the most ideal treatment, but still they do control the tumor. Apart from this, there is chemotherapy and radiotherapy. There are new studies coming saying that the radiotherapy is giving good results, but that is done in a clinical trial setting. But as a recommended practice, if this cancer is resectable and the liver disease is not very advanced, then you can go ahead with surgical resection. But if it also has advanced liver disease along with a tumor, the preferred treatment, if it is possible, is to get a liver transplant done.
Okay, so that is the best treatment, either resection, you remove the whole tumor, or doing a liver transplantation. Okay, so with this, hopefully we are able to clear some of your doubts related to this hepatitis infection. So in the pandemic of corona, so this topic I feel is relevant, and we are quite safe. We are taking every precaution at our hospital. Any further queries or any doubts, please visit us at Aster RV Hospital, JP Nagar. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions and queries, you can post it on the Facebook and we'll be very happy to answer it. And if you're not satisfied, you can consult us at Aster Hospital, JP Nagar, and we'll be more than glad to help you out with your queries.